I call this talk, What is Taekwondo Poomsae? The etymology of form. And as I said in the opening, the idea is kind of mastery. We spend a lot of time doing these practices, but I don't really think we get into the formation of what they really are. And I think that when you find out and you put that together, that adds to your both performance and your action of that Poomsae altogether. So for me, this kind of started with my teacher, Mr. Kim, or Kim Jong-un, full name. He came here in 1959 and ended up at Michigan State as well and became a faculty member there. But it was Mr. Kim, my Mr. Kim, and Dr. Yang at Howard University, and Dr. Kin Min at Nichols University in Wyoming. They were the first Koreans that got together and decided that they were going to make a, kind of a collegiate Taekwondo league, which eventually led to the national, at that time, USTU, led to that. The three of them kind of got together. And Dr. Yang on the East Coast at Howard, he had the first championships, and then Michigan State had the second. And then by that time, I think Berkeley had it, and it went off to Dr. Min at Berkeley. But these guys spent a lot of time doing this stuff. So they were very well kind of known. When I walked into his class, what was really kind of cool was I knew he was an Olympic person. Mr. Kim was also a judo player. He was the 1980 Olympic judo coach who didn't get to go because in 1980 we boycotted the Olympics, but he's also the first and only American that's been a referee at 3 Olympic Games. They usually bounce that around a little bit. He's been to 3 of them. He's fully retired now, and all he does is play golf. But when I walked into his class the first time, he wrote 2 things on the board. The first one was this. I'm sure you recognize it. Force equals mass times acceleration, one of Isaac Newton's little gems. And when he wrote that down, being a nerd and a mathlete myself, I was already captivated because I loved kind of the, Kung Fu stuff and Kung Fu theater. But when he put that math equation up there, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm in the right place. But then he wrote something else. He wrote these characters. And when I saw that, I knew the math, but when I looked at the characters, something else got me at that particular spot. And as he talked and lectured all the time, he always used, Korean and also Chinese characters because they use Chinese characters too. And he would write them on the board, and I just thought it was magical. And my dream was, as I looked at it, as I thought to myself, that is where I want to go. To me, this is the guy, and that's the knowledge that I want to be able to do. So in this talk, I have a couple things that I want to go over. The first one, and a lot of this will be, you all know this, I'm just introducing it because I want to create context. Cultural practices in martial arts. I also want to look at martial arts and language, and you'd be surprised the link between the two. It's wonderful, as I just pointed out, him writing those characters on the chalkboard. I want to look at Taekwondo influences and Poomsae history. It does have kind of a little lineage and where it comes from, and we need to sort of see that. Poomsae theory. There is a theory and method of developing Poomsae that I think a lot of people miss too. So if we go to cultural practices in martial arts, pretty common for all of us, we're all martial artists, we've seen this before, but some of the elements that we have, things like progression, which is a great sort of system to do that. Of course, everyone knows the belt system. The belt system was actually invented by Jigoro Kano in 1855. That's the very first time that there was ever a black belt. And he was the founder of judo. And he just had a really good idea. Well, then Gunjin Funakoshi took it from him and thought that was great. And it kind of transferred down to all the rest of us. So we have all of the belt colors. Respect. I added that one in there because that is kind of a different thing in our sport. I think, that when we walk into a dojang, we're already kind of acting a little bit differently and sort of creating some of these cultural practices, but they're functional. And it really kind of helps us to study things that are violent, I guess. Fitness. Fitness is probably one of the best benefits of any kind of sport, and particularly, in martial arts, looking at things like strength, flexibility, agility. It's one of the best things we can do. Longevity. Now, I'm saying that now too, because I'll be 60 this year and I'm still, heavily competing and been practicing for a long time, and still challenged and want to sort of continue. So I really like that aspect of it where all ages can compete. And again, at the World Championships, there are athletes that are 70 years old and they're amazing. Community. I think that's what we're seeing right here. I know Master Willard, Master Lawrence, and Master Paul, everyone's sort of putting this thing together now and sort of creating a community and inviting everyone together to share knowledge. That is probably my favorite part of all this. And a really hard one to look at, kind of intangible maybe, but spirit. There's a spirit behind kind of what we do. I don't know why we do it. I don't know if any of us could say exactly why we do it, but we're drawn to it, and it's something that we want to practice. Martial arts are an oral tradition, and they're really designed that way. And in this modern world where we can videotape things and have it in a book and paper and do all this sort of thing, it really is kind of an anachronism a little bit if you really look at it. But meant to be an oral tradition, so passed down from one person to another through language, a dance, story, whatever. And I've got that little, you can see my little quick definition there: information that's stored in stories, rituals, language to be passed down from one generation to the next. I mean, a lot of things do this, but martial arts is particular. We have to memorize the information, and then we have to perform it and then sort of pass it down. So as it gets watered up a little bit, it loses a lot of its potency. Some of those things are through folklore and myths. There are a lot of myths in martial arts and a lot of folklore. And I do spend a lot of time debunking those just because I kind of like it. But I think the reason that they're there is the most important thing. I mean, some of the stories that we tell and share are probably hundreds of years old. And we add a little bit to them, subtract a little bit to them, but it's kind of cool. Like here, I have a little picture of the Shaolin monks. The classic story of martial arts is, of course, that Bodhidharma walked out of India, ended up at Shaolin. For 9 years, he sat in the cave and burned a hole in the wall. And then he went and taught the monks the animal styles of martial arts. And then it all continues from there. Probably most of that's not true. Even Shaolin itself is, didn't really get really big until the Kung Fu movies, and not even big at all until the 80s. And now there's like 5 different Shaolins and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny. But, I think those things kind of keep us there and keep us interested. Cultural practices, obviously, we do things very differently in martial arts. The uniforms that we wear, the dobok, the bowing, all the different little things that we're practicing really make part for transmitting that knowledge. And then physical practices, the obvious things. We are doing, again, Poomsae, kata, whatever you want to call it. From that, we're kicking, punching, drills, doing all these things. That's how we're transmitting all this knowledge to the next person. So ritualized movement is one of the ways that information is basically transmitted in oral tradition kinds of things. And you've seen these in many things. It's not just martial arts, but like, dancers in Siam, where they're telling a story and they do this. I mean, this is part of their folklore. Kind of like, don't think of, the wushu, like Chinese martial arts being, that's the most important thing, but really their opera even has it. So this is a scene from a Chinese opera. And obviously, we can look at the wushu stance and the sword, and all these stories were very important in their kind of heritage. The Maasai warriors themselves have ritualized movement and dance and things that they use to transmit. Here, they do the jump so they can see very far across the plain and hunt. But that's put into a dance so that everybody learns it, but it's functional, but kind of lost. Our own Marine Corps, the silent drill platoon, they're amazing. And I use them all the time as a structure for form, because they are able to do some high precision work with their rifle and flip it all around. And it doesn't seem as though that their weapon, that they'd be able to use that in combat. But I would beg to differ and say that that Marine who has that skill would never drop his rifle in combat because he understands it so well. He has mastered it in time and space around him. So he might be better, but it's very hard to get to that level. And of course, obviously, for Taekwondo, one of those things is Poomsae and the high skill level that's shown. So when we talk about benefits of form practice, I know in many classes I see instructors, they are, teaching their students, and the kids are like, "Why are we doing this?" kind of thing. So they come up with a litany of things, and I've put a few of them down here that I hear all the time. It's for testing and progression. Obviously we do use this tool for testing and progression, and it is a way for us to kind of metric, where they are. Although interestingly, I think you'd all agree that the forms don't really seem to follow any, like the first one's not easier than the last one necessarily. There's some complex stuff in there, but once it gets to a certain point, it doesn't seem to get harder and harder and harder. It's kind of almost the same. It's just different moves. So, but that's what we use them for right now. And people get really lost in that one. Coordination of the body. Well, yeah, I agree with that one as well. But I think, any kind of movement in kinesiology, you're going to have a coordination of the body. Is just a natural affecting in there. So again, it's true. Endurance. Yeah, I think if you did a lot of Poomsae really hard and you were kicking and doing stuff, yeah, you get some endurance out of it. It could be helpful to you. I don't know necessarily if it would be if it would be better than fight training, and practice, but it's still there for that. Focus. I can also give that one a little credibility, but you are focusing on one thing, and that's difficult to do. Precision, again, kind of going in there. Combat techniques. I hear this one a lot too, that it's about fighting. And when we really look at how forms are designed and what they're supposed to do, I can't put myself behind that one as much. I don't think that it's about fighting as much as it is about learning how to learn about fighting. And really, my main paradigm in this is the continuity and preservation of the art. Poomsae have created a living encyclopedia that can be passed down to students through an oral tradition. So it's all the moves. If you take all of the Poomsae and you look at them all together, you'll get every move, every kind of kick, not every kick, but the basics of punching, blocking, kicking, moving. You'll get all of that from that when you add it all together. If there's any questions, I want you to chime in and jump up if you have questions, comments, anything as I'm giving this. I definitely don't want you to sit silently through the whole thing if you don't want to. So martial arts and language. Right now, you see a lot of characters flashing up on the screen. I know I was always fascinated by Chinese characters. I thought they were beautiful. And the calligraphy, and when I saw it, and people get these things tattooed on them and stuff all the time. And if you cannot read Chinese characters, all these things that I just flashed up on the screen, you look at them, you just go, I don't really know what that is. But when you're able to read, which I can, I see like dojang, taekwondo, kung fu, kangsuro, tangsuro, hapkido, judo or judo, ki, everything is there. These are some of the most important artifacts that we can have. And my teacher was a great guy. And I remember when I was going to be promoted to 4th Dan, getting close, he was like, I can't promote you until you can learn to read and write and speak some basic Korean. And okay. And in 5th Dan, he was like, you have to learn Chinese characters. You have to learn the first 1,500 Chinese characters or I'll not promote you to 5th Dan. So all these things, and I loved it myself, but I didn't really see the benefit directly until a little bit later on. So basic Chinese characters are kind of cool. Can you see my mouse, Len?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So Chinese characters, Koreans When they use them, they call it hanja. And hanja is their Chinese characters, and they use traditional characters. Now, there's a difference between traditional and simplified characters. Simplified are used in mainland China now. The traditional are used, like Taiwan uses them, and some other places too, and Korea as well. But they use it in their formal language. They're designed from kind of pictograms. So really ideograms, we would call them when we look at them. On the left here, these are some of the original like oracle bones that they found when Chinese writing was being developed. And let's focus on this one down here, shan. Okay, shan is the Chinese way to pronounce it. San would be the Korean way. But we look at this, and this is making a mountain. So you see very clearly a picture. You see as it begins to evolve as we go to the right and slide in. Here we have like a standard kind of script in this position where you can see that character mountain. And we can go over to the other side. Even the simplified versions of these simple characters are very easy to see. And this is what it turns into as mountain. So although modern Chinese has a lot of phonemes and stuff like that, where they are making sounds, there's also behind it a kind of a story to tell, or a picture. And if you look at moon, it's the same way. So this is what the moon originally looked like. You got a little crescent moon, but it ends up looking like this, or, you know, the very end one when you look at that. And then the sun is the same way, kind of the sun with a dot in the middle of it. So you can see it's kind of a pictogram, and there's a story to tell, and that will become important. So this is the character for tranquility in Chinese. And I use this one a lot because it really gives a great interpretation of one way to look at these characters. Not all the modern characters can be kind of put underneath the scrutiny, but they'll fit. So tranquility. Why is it tranquility when I look at that? Here's why. The first radical that you see is the top one there, and that is the roof. And the second radical underneath is a woman. When you put those together, it literally means a man who has a roof over his head and a wife lives in tranquility. So that's the story they're trying to tell, you know, about this, whether you see it or not. I mean, this one's pretty easy and pretty obvious. When we look at Taekwondo itself, that's kind of important as well. That term Taekwondo, I've heard many different versions of where people say that it came from, people say General Che and all this kind of stuff. It kind of evolved amongst a lot of people. If I write it in English, we say Taekwondo. It doesn't really have meaning. English is a phonetic language, although it's horrible spelling, right? So you could spell this multiple different ways because it's just sounds. But we've adopted this particular spelling here, Taekwondo. It doesn't mean anything to us. Even if I write it in Hangul, it doesn't mean anything because Korean is also phonetic, and this would be the T kind of sound. This is E, so te, and then ku, wan, and then do. So Taekwondo would be that sound. It doesn't really tell me what it is. When this word was first written, it was not written in Hangul. It was written in Hanja. So these are the three characters that they kind of came up with when they were doing it. And these were, common characters anyway, except for this one. This one's kind of a little bit different because there is another character. Let's look at those three characters. So the first one, te, we all know this. It means to stomp with the foot. There is actually a character for kicking. They didn't use it. They meant kind of crushing with a foot. So that's kind of important. Quan, when you look at that means making a fist. And actually, this bottom character, this bottom radical, is hand. And this upper one alludes to rice. So it means making a rice ball. When you roll it, when you crush a rice ball in your hand to try to make it, you make a fist and you squeeze and you do that. That's the literal term for that. And the last one, do. the most common suffix on all martial arts now, judo, kendo, taekwondo, aikido, karate do, all those things. Do became this big thing. The Japanese started that habit. And do, this kind of meant your head on a path. So a path or a way, it just means you were focused on kind of one thing and kind of go in that direction. It's a beautiful character and one of my favorite ones. But do, so not only did they want to say crushing and with the foot and making a fist, but they wanted to make it something else. They wanted to say it's a way of things. And again, remember, they stole this kind of nomenclature style from the Japanese who had already done that. So Korean terms for forms. As Korean martial arts were kind of coming up, and we will talk about the history of that, they used a few things for forms. The first one that they used was hyung. So hyung, when Taekwondo was young and before even called Taekwondo, Tangsudo or Kangsudo or Taesudo, any of those things, their forms were called hyung. And hyung, this character right here, is composed of three things. I think I'll cover it in a second, but this is actually kata. Japanese would look at this and say kata, and Koreans look at this and they say hyung. So the other term that eventually evolved out of that in the late 60s, early 70s was Poomsae. Now, those of you that have been around for a while, remember they used to spell it this way, S-E. Now they spell S-A-E. And even the Hangul changed. So here you can say the first one's Poomsae. So not really Poomsae, but Poomsae. It sounds like Poomsae. And then the other one, Poomsae, like Taekwondo, so same character there. So Poomsae. But this one at the top is the hanja that goes with this first one. And we'll talk about what happened to the hanja on this one down here at the bottom in a minute. But this is the one that they're doing. And then the next one was the ITF. The ITF, or General Che, he used a completely different word. He called it tul. And it has no hanja equivalent because they didn't use hanja. This is a purely Korean word that they came up with. And it meant like the same kind of thing, like form or actually it means frame, like framework. Well, when you look it up in a dictionary. So they used tul. So the first one, hyung, and very important one. It means model, shape, form, and template. Here's why. So the first radical is shape, as you see it appear there. The second one is cutting. And then the third one is the earth. So actually this character for model, shape, or form means shape that cuts the earth. And why would that mean model, shape, form, template? Let's talk about that. So the first thing you can think of is shape that cuts the earth. Here I have an old clay tablet. I think this was maybe Samaria or something. This was found. And they are drawing the plans of a city on a clay tablet. They're drawing a model of the city. That's really where this is coming from. So if I were to draw in the dirt a picture of a bridge that I was going to build or something, that's kind of my model for doing it. So shape that cuts the earth, it's actually referring to something like that. That's where that term model comes from. Other martial arts use a very similar thing. There's an Indian martial art, Kali Ripayatu, which is a really kind of strange kind of martial art. I've never seen it practiced in real life, and I do want to check it out, but they practice in a dugout thing in the ground, and they draw pictures on the ground, and they kind of use that as their movement pattern when they're doing the martial art. So there's kind of a neat thing, and that predates all of the other martial arts that we would think of. Remember the myth of Bodhidharma walking out of India and going to China. Well, this is starting to add a little evidence to support that kind of idea. Definitely the knowledge transmitted that way. Chinese martial arts, Bagwaje. So this is Bagwa, or that you've seen, and Koreans would say Palge. But when they practice their martial art of Bagwa, they practice it in a circle as they kind of move around on there. So that's their model in the dirt. And then obviously karate kata, has the same sort of thing. Here I have a figure standing on the ground. You can see before him this character over here. So where he's going to kind of make a little character on the ground. We'll get to that too. So that's for Hyung. Poomsae is a little different. So Poomsae is composed of these two characters, really Poomsae. I'm just going to say Poomsae. It really doesn't matter right now. There's a big fight going on about it, but Poomsae in general here. These are the characters that make up the Hanja. And what do they mean? Well, the first set is 3 radicals. It means articles. The second one has cultivating, and then the bottom one is strength. So literally, when we look at these characters, it means articles for cultivating strength. That's my fancy way of saying it. And if I was gonna, kind of talk down to myself and kind of think, I think stuff that makes you better, a group of things that make you better. So in a way, when we talk about Poomsae, we are not talking about one Hyung or one form. We're talking about a collection. That's what this character is. You might see this often at a Chinese grocery store, because this will be one of the characters, because it's like, here's a collection of food. But it's a group of things that they're talking about, not just one thing. And I think that's really important when you kind of see the kind of philosophy of where they wanted to go with Poomsae in general. So now the difference between the two and what really happened here between Poomsae and Poomsae. So in 87, the Kukyuan made some changes, and they were trying, the Korean Language Society at the time was trying to remove Chinese influence. And again, this is political, this is their business. We can agree with it or not agree with it. It doesn't matter, but they wanted to remove Chinese influence from a lot of their things, just like they were removing Japanese influence too. They had remember they were invaded in 1910 and held until 1945, till after the war. So they kind of want to push this stuff out. So because I showed you those characters, Poomsae had some Chinese characters. They're like, no, we don't want those characters anymore. We're going to change the spelling to Poomsae, and we're going to call it that. So they told the committee, they said, hey, we want to take this, and the Korean Language Society said you should do it, and they said, okay, we'll take a look at it. In 2011, they have a National Institute of Language there, and it's kind of like, it takes whatever colloquial things they have and makes it like official. It's kind of like if we have slang added to our dictionary here, every year you'll kind of see that at the end of the year, what words were added to the dictionary. Is kind of a funny little post or whatever on Facebook. But they did the same thing here. So in 2011, they finally recognized Poomsae as SAE, that particular spelling, this one up here, as the official language, and kind of made that crossover, and basically removed the Hanja from that description. So remember that the first one was Poomsae, and it kind of looked like this right here. That's the Hanja for it right there. And then that meant articles for cultivating strength. And then it's kind of like a homonym, but not quite, because you've got a little more thing. But Poomsae now, this is the Korean character. And what they wanted that to mean was quality shapes. Okay. So a lot of high-level masters that have been around for a long time, in fact, many of them that I've talked to, they disagree with this completely. And they're kind of like, yeah, we'll call it Poomsae, but we know what it really means over here. And again, this is still used to this day. I see it every time we're at World Championships. I mean, even from the Korean team. So I mean, I don't really know what to say. That's their politics. And I guess I really don't have an opinion on it either way, but I'd like to know the whole story there. So when I say Poomsae refers to a collection of forms, that's why, this is the original book over here. Hopefully you all have a copy of that. If you don't, you should grab it. You can find it pretty cheap sometimes, but get them before they disappear. But this was the original book that was written in the 70s, so that you could see all the Poomsae together, both Palge and Taeguk. And it's the whole collection of them together, and the black belt forms all together. This is a modern interpretation of that book, which is very good too. You should get a hold of that one because it's really neat. You can see it's got a lot more descriptions now and put everything. And this is just a little picture of Taeguk one. I think I drew these like 20 years ago. They're bouncing around the internet. You might see them out there. People find them all the time. but I drew all the forms in little pictograms that were kind of very basic when I was young. So, but it means everything, all of them together. We're not talking about individual stuff. So you need them all. That's my collection. That's the whole thing. That's the encyclopedia of Taekwondo. So language is super important, not only for what I just told you there, when you start to look at it, but also for the actual forms and the techniques themselves. Here I am doing santelmaki. So santelmaki is mountain block. We all know this block and we sort of look at it. And why is it called mountain block? Why I've heard multiple descriptions of this, but I'm going to show you exactly why. Some of you probably already know just from what I've showed you before here, but it's called mountain block because it makes the shape of the Chinese character mountain. That is simply why. If Westerners would have come up with this, we might have called it the W block or the sideways E block or something like that. So when somebody was doing this block, a person who understood Chinese characters looked at it and goes, oh my gosh, you look like you're doing a mountain. Oh yeah, let's call it mountain block. Yeah, this is mountain block. That's where this would have come from. So that etymology of that is beautiful and really, really important. And there are multiple things in Taekwondo moves and forms and stuff that follow this pattern that are really cool little gems to know. These are some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with you when we get together in person. And so now you'll know where I'm coming from when I bring this stuff up and I put it in there so I can give you these wonderful little treasures that are out there that really make the whole system kind of come alive. Without the understanding of language, you can't see these things and they disappear and lose themselves over time, which I find sad.
As a tangent, like on the mountain block, when did they start naming these things? How far back does that go? And
way back, all the way back. The very first time they wrote it down, they were naming these things. And that naming convention, a lot of Chinese martial arts have very beautiful, like flowery names for some of their techniques. You know, you've heard it before. If you watch any Kung Fu movies, you know, jumping monkey fist, you know, angel, you know, they'll have this cool little name for it, you know, when they look at it, because it may look like a pagoda statue or something interesting like that. So it's been around from the beginning, but when they were doing it, they're like, hey, yeah, that's the mountain block.
When you say from the beginning, because I know we talk a lot about the history of Taekwondo and then the forming of the Taegus. I think you're going to mention this later about, you know, they were formed and they were relatively recent. So when you say beginning, when are we talking?
Well, I mean, whenever that technique first shows up. So when we find a form where that technique exists,
okay,
it had a name. They always named everything. And those names haven't changed. I mean, I've gone back, like I said, I'll show you later. I have the original documents, actually a copy. I don't have the original, but I have a copy of the original time they actually wrote the forms down. And I look in there and I can find the names. They're right there. So.
And those have not changed over time, really?
No, the names haven't changed. They've tried to do a couple things. I know the ITF kind of went one way, and the Kukiwan WTF, they kind of went another way. And the ITF kind of stuck with actually Japanese nomenclature, but in the Korean pronunciation. So they stuck really hard with the karate influence, and the Koreans kind of made their own little way. I mean, some of them early things, some of the early Tongsuro practitioners did use some more Japanese style things for different stances and things like that. But most of the Korean lineage that we all go into used these from the beginning. And it's really hard to say because I can't tell you when the beginning was. Nobody can. But from any artifact left behind that we can see.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Taekwondo itself, because I think that's important too, and some of the influences and also Poomsae history. So influence of Taekwondo, we all know Taekwondo was invaded in 1910. And uh, you know, the Japanese were not the best host at that time and taking them over, but their arts were definitely transmitted to the Koreans. My teacher was an artifact of that. He grew up during the Japanese occupation, and I've had extensive conversations with him about it. And that's why he kind of got into judo. He did judo. He did, kendo. His dad did kendo. All these sorts of things. The Japanese wanted to basically kind of bring people into the Japanese culture. So they made all the school kids do this kind of stuff because it would kind of make them happy. You've heard of the famous Japanese Masoyama, if you've ever heard of him. He was actually a Korean guy named Che, who fell in love with Japanese culture and changed his name to a Japanese name and also started Chokushinkai karate. So, I mean, he kind of went the other way, sort of thing. He found his passion from that. But the Japanese arts are definitely there heavily in the systems that we use today, currently, all of them for Taekwondo. There were some Chinese arts influences as well. They're hard to see sometimes, but I think they're there. And I think we can sort of look at them. And I've talked to a couple of mid-level Chinese practitioners, and they tell me some things, but I'm still working on finding a really high level Chinese martial artist to share some of this stuff with and see what they would tell me and kind of put pieces together. And of course, Korean arts. Now, I know everyone's got the story about Taekyon and all this kind of stuff, and this is a picture of Taekyon fighters and kind of practicing, and you hear that myth that, or I should say the dogma of Taekwondo, that it came from that. But most of the time, these were just folk games. They really were. Stuart Cullen wrote a famous book, in the 1800s, where he went over there, and it really was called like bikakaki, which means flying kick sort of thing. It didn't even really have a name, Taekyon. And of course, one of the other things, the biggest arguments of when we talk about from an academic standpoint, is that Taekyon doesn't have a Hanja to go with it, doesn't have Chinese characters. If it doesn't have Chinese characters with it, it means that it wasn't a very big deal. They really didn't pay that much attention to it. It was a folk game played by people. That doesn't mean that it's not, one of the biggest influences, because it kind of is in a way, but it wasn't some big martial art and all this sort of thing. No, it was just a game that people play, just like tag and stuff like that. They just like to kick each other in Korea, so they did that, which I thought was kind of cool. Taekwondo evolved from these sort of things. It kind of starts out, we all see these famous pictures up here. Kwandap, it's called, okay? And really in Chinese, we'd say chuanfa, which is the fist law, basically. But everyone sort of equates this to Taekwondo. But if you look up here in the top right there, do you see that? Where I'm circling, that's chuanfa. It very clearly tells you it is kwandap. Okay, it is not, any kind of taekyon or any of this sort of thing. They're talking about a Chinese martial art there that was in their military manual, and they're just sort of looking at it. And this is where you can start to get those flowery names when you translate these. It's kind of cool, like whip kick, bird strike, all these weird sort of things that it starts to say. Kong Sudo. Now I say Kong Sudo because you've heard that before, Kong Sudo, and you've also heard of Tong Sudo. Okay, same and different, but what's really cool is when these changed, and that is Kong Sudo was kind of first. And these characters are very important when you look at it, because a Korean who reads Hanja and has a different pronunciation for most of them reads this as Kong Sudo. However, a Japanese person who reads this as from their kanji would call it karate do. So karate do is there. In 1936, Funakoshi himself changed the character from down here. This also is Tongsudo. This is kind of around there too. So Tongsudo, this character Tongsudo, guess what? It's a homonym. In Japanese, you would say karate do. So this was the original way that karate do was written, the way that they wrote Tongsudo. And this means the Tang Dynasty. What this character actually means when you look at it is kind of rude soldiers marching. So they always considered the Tang soldiers to be kind of rude. So they go ruled China, the China hand. So the rude Chinese soldiers hand way is what that meant. Well, in 1936, as I said, Funakoshi changed it. He didn't want anything to do with China. He did the same thing the Koreans did with the other language, and he changed it to empty, okay, or the void here, void hand way or empty hand way. So you see this a lot. You see them changing. Some of the Koreans stayed in this line and they didn't want to change their name. They just called Poomsae, is very similar with Hwang Ki here. And Master Paul's teacher is a direct lineage person in this line, one of the top people in the entire world, but just to throw that out there. And then Kong Sudo was kind of a more modernized, stylized thing of that. And then after that became Tae Sudo. So Tae Sudo, our almost stayed this. It almost was named this. This kind of came, when these kind of guys started to merge together and they started to try to organize, they decided, oh, we'll call it Tae Sudo. And there's that character Tae for the first time. Crushing with the foot, hand way is what that kind of meant. And for a long time, they called it that. I don't want to say a long time because this Taekwondo is so young. So in 1961, the Korean Tae Sudo Association is actually formed. And then in 63, it became an official event at their national sports games. So kind of like their, the old AAU where they bring all the sports together, and kind of test them. This was actually a real event. And they wore hogu and they, fought very similar to how we fight now. I mean, no punching to the face, but, no takedowns and, same kind of rules. They kicked to the body and they had judges kind of go, but it became an official game and it was called Tae Sudo. Not until 1965 did the name Taekwondo become really just, that was it. They're going to decide it. Around 55, they started talking about it, but it took about 10 years for them to actually change the name to Tae Sudo. So, in that short 4 years, they got it all together and they said, no, we're not going to call it Tae Sudo. We're going to call it Taekwondo. And that's merged itself into the KTA. It really is the same organization, but they just changed the name. And not until 71 did Taekwondo become Korea's national sport. And when that happened, the Koreans, which are amazing at doing this sort of thing, they decided they're going to get at this in the Olympic Games. Now, judo was in there in 64, and they're like, nope, we're going to get Taekwondo in the Olympic Games. And they started along a path to make that their primary function, and they did that fast. That's one of the fastest sports to ever jump. Again, you're talking about from a national sport, their national sport, and then a world sport in 73. So the Kukiwon and the World Taekwondo Federation were formed at exactly the same time, and they had exactly the same president, both of them, and that's Eun Young Kim here, who passed away a few years ago. We won't talk about his corruption, arrest, and all that kind of stuff. But he was a very instrumental person to get this all together. He wasn't really a Taekwondo guy, but he was a really organized, connected person. It actually ended up as a vice president of the Olympic Committee as well, and that's how he was able to get Taekwondo quickly into the Olympic Games. So he really did a lot for the sport altogether. So when we look at early Taekwondo Hyung from all these things, I'm just going to put some pictures up. You can see there's some differences and similarities, but they were a lot more elaborate sometimes, and because they used a lot of karate kata kind of thing. And here you have General Che and Mr. Shim, and then Hwang Ki, practicing these things. And then here's a bunch of Korean Cheongdeokwan guys from a long time ago. But I want you to notice a couple of things. There are no wide stances and things like that people claim that they used to be wide and everything. No. They're the same thing that we do today.
So I must point out that
Yeah.
they are not wide because there's no room.
Well, that may be possible, but I think that they kind of get in there. But yeah, that's pretty crammed together. But this is kind of the old, the old way that they kind of practice and stuff like that to do everything all crammed together, but they all performing. I wish I knew what form they were doing, but who knows? All of the early Hyung were based on karate because they were already done. The person that really kind of is credited with all this is Itosu Yatsutsume from Japan, and he was Ginjin Funakoshi's teacher. Actually, he was from Okinawa. Sorry, Ginjin Funakoshi moved to Japan. But I'm going to show you some early Hyung, and you take a look at them, all you Taekwondo practitioners, and you tell me what you see. You're going to see these are karate kata practiced by Funakoshi himself and some other guys. They're all, oops, sorry, let me go back to that. We do all this stuff up here. This is like the same thing we do in Taebaek, right? Here, Pyongwon kind of thing, the same sort of thing. This one's done Ilyo, right? Here's Kumgang, you've seen this. This is a modification of, what we start in choreo sometimes. Kankudai kind of starts here, but Kusenku, I think they call it. But I mean, these moves they're stealing directly from these moves, and that's okay, because really it was just an evolution of that art. So Poomsae itself gets adopted, and down here I've got the picture. I put some pictures up of the pictures that I have. I have this document which I'm translating right now. This is the original, and you can see they even drew it on a piece of paper. They didn't have printed stuff back then, no Photoshop. And they've got it all. This is the form. And this just says, the Korean Taekwondo Association's high level form kind of thing. And they use the character for form down here is hyung or kata. This is before they had the term Poomsae. And here they're drawing out the form, and here they're looking at the Yonmusan of where you stand. And when you look at it, this is, handwriting actually, writing all that. And they did all the forms that way. So in 1967, the Korean Taekwondo Association got together and they said, okay, we're going to use the 8 Palge forms for our gup holders. And then they created the 9 Dan forms. And then later they came back in 1971 and they decided to change it to the Taeguk forms. I'll tell you kind of why they did that in a little bit. But Palge, I remember I learned Palge first, and then I learned Taeguk second. When I went in there. So that was just something that people kind of did there, but that's where they changed it in 1967. So now.
So were those Taegu forms created after that period of time? So in 1967,
yes,
the Pages already existed. Those were not very old though, correct?
Yeah, they're not very old. They were truly created in the 1960s. And the Taeguk forms had some starts in the 1960s too. They had an original set that was called, Taeguk 1, 2, and 3, and they were very, very different because Taeguk, those 2 Chinese characters, if I look in Chinese, it's like Tai Chi. That's what it kind of means. So, but they did 1, 2, 3, and they were just kind of like the Kibon forms. Those became the Kibon forms, and then they went ahead and made a Taeguk set later on. So it was after that, but not much after it. There was kind of let me just say there was a competing group of individuals that were bucking for power there. And the Palge forms were very Korean. I mean, the Palge forms were very Japanese based forms, and the Taeguks were a little more original. And so they decided to go with theirs. And actually, I think they made the right choice, although I love the Palge forms. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then the development of the black belt forms, they stuck with those, and those were not changed ever?
Right. Well, no, there were some changes. Choreo, for instance, there was another version of choreo that was trying to hang on for a while, but they're mostly the same. And, when you really look at those forms and you take them apart, I can pull every one of their moves out of a karate form. So, they were very well versed in all of the 27 Shotokan karate forms, and they took the moves directly from there. In fact, they took some sequences directly from there too. And that's a whole nother conversation, and that's another 2-hour talk. We can do maybe another time, but I can show you where they took what from and everything. But that's just kind of the way the evolution goes.
And that would be interesting. When you refer to the choreo, is that what we all know as old choreo?
Yeah, you've heard it sometimes called old choreo. Yeah.
And it's a much different form. Doesn't look anything like the other one.
It's a very, very different form. Yeah, it's kind of a very linear form. It goes up and back pretty much. So it's not really side to side sort of form. And there's some really good things that I don't know if you know who Kang Shin Chul is. Does that name sound familiar to you? I should have put a picture of him in here. But I have really great correspondence with him. If you've seen him before, you've seen him. He's a Korean master that wears robes all the time. He's got really long hair and a beard.
Oh, yeah,
And white. Yeah. He's an amazing guy and a long time Mudak Kwan, lineage kind of person. And he's the one that I get a lot of this, like the original book from. He owns the original paperwork for that, and he copied it for me and gave it to me. And I've been really good friends with him for a while, and correspond with him about this sort of thing too. And so he kind of gives me real good insight because he was there. He was there from the beginning.
Firsthand. Excellent.
Yeah. So when we talk about Poomsae, people kind of get confused when we talk about standards and competition. So the Kukiwan's job, supposed job, is to create the standard for Taekwondo training and instruction. World Taekwondo, their job is to have competition. So there can be some differences. And I have seen it before, like if I'm training sometimes with a Kukiwan instructor, he might do things a little bit different than sometimes we use at the world level in competition. It's very subtle, and people get really confused by it, thinking that the forms are changing all the time. But they really don't change. It's just that sometimes the focus gets changed on a specific thing where one guy likes to do it this way and, kind of pushes it and that goes. So I will tell you that being a competitor, we are extremely flexible. We will go into a competition and watch and see, and then we will change our technique to match what is going on that day. It's a little complex. It's a little frustrating. I can understand, but it's part of the game. But the Kukiwan has been, for the last decade, has really done a good job of locking this down and really trying to make a standard that we can all follow. And it's working because it's starting to happen. I'm going to local competitions here in Michigan, and I'm seeing, really, really good Poomsae, which is exactly what we didn't see 20 years ago. I mean, it was just, it was a crapshoot whether you get something good or not. So the first world championships were held in 2006. They decided to make Poomsae an official sport. And in 2006, they had it. And from that day, we've been kind of going strong and going after that. So let's talk a little bit about Poomsae theory and really what makes it. And this will kind of be getting to the end of our talk here. So all Poomsae, or hyung, or kata, whatever you want to call it, they have a couple elements. And you may or may not think about it very much. The number one thing is a name with a historical or philosophical meaning. All of them have a name, and that name means something. Even if I say Taeguk number 1, Taeguk Iljang, right? Taeguk chapter 1 is what that would mean in a translation. There's something behind that because it's talking about Taeguk, and we'll get to that in a minute. But they all sort of have a name. But Koryo, Kumgang, Taeguk. I mean, there's your name, and it has some sort of meaning. The obvious is that it has techniques of offensive, defensive, physiological, psychological, whatever, are added in there. That's the given thing. But the real kicker is they all have a discrete pattern of performance. And what I'm talking about is something in Korean we call the yeonmusan, or sometimes they will just say yeonmu. They'll remove the suffix part. But the yeonmusan, in Japanese, they call that the imbusan. Poomsae names, examples, Taebek. Taebek is talking about a mountain range. That is actually the Taebek mountain range in Korea. That's the backbone that's on the eastern coast of Korea. It goes all the way up. And it's very, very famous. Taeguk is talking, and Palge both talk about the same things. They're just saying something a little bit different about it, right? Palge is the 8 trigrams. Taeguk is also the 8 trigrams. So both of these sort of mean the same thing, but this is what they're talking about, is the trigrams that surround the umenyang. Remember, it's umenyang in Korean. And then, like I've just brought up Koryo. Koryo is talking about the dynasty, the Koryo dynasty. That's the first time the country was united into one country and not, 3 or 4 different places. You've all heard of Bakje and Silla and all this kind of that myth that comes in there. Well, choreo was in there. So they all have some sort of name. They have techniques. We all know this. There's punches and strikes, blocks, and kicking. And I will throw stances in there, but that's going to kind of be given when we're looking at that. And then the most important part, and where I'm really getting to this, is the Yeonmusun or Imbusun. The Yeonmusun is the pattern that is followed on the ground. And you may not have thought about that. So here's the character, Yeonmusun. And when we translate that, it means performing martial line. So it has its own name and everything. So the line that you're following on the ground. And here's an example. Here we have our Taekwondo player standing on the pattern for Palge 1. Or it could be another form, right? Because this is the most common pattern found in all of Karate Kata and Taekwondo and Poomsae and everything. Westerners often call it the H pattern or the I pattern, which is just because they don't speak Chinese or they can't read Chinese characters. This is actually the Chinese character for gong or worker. We'll talk about that second. All of these things are vector maps and they follow calligraphy rules, believe it or not. And what I mean by a vector map is when you put the pen down on the paper, you can't lift it up. Okay, so here you see the actual Yeonmusun is this black line, but underneath it, do you see the superimposed kind of character for water? So even though this doesn't make the exact character for water when you look at it, you can see that it's trying to follow. That's what it's trying to make. The form is trying to make a Chinese character on the ground. In fact, all forms make some sort of symbol or Chinese character. All karate forms, all Korean forms are making something on the ground. That's why when I said shape that cuts the earth is the most important part of it. So the basics is very similar to calligraphy. Actually, if you look at this character, these are all the same character. The last one is hard to read because it's something called brush script, which means they put the pin down and they can't lift it up and they have to make these shapes right here. So even sometimes, a native person can't read the writing, but they think it's beautiful, and when you find out what it means, you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. So it's just kind of like a stylized version of that, just because that sometimes our forms are like that when we make them in the dirt. So all the Poomsae create these characters. And here I've got all the characters that all the Poomsae make for us. This is everything right here. This is all the black belt forms. This is all the taeguks. The taeguks are cool because they make these over here. They make the trigrams. That's why they're different than Palge. Palge make these over here. They make the standard Chinese character kind of things. But taeguk came in and said, no, you weren't consistent. Let's be consistent. And their characters make all 8 of the trigrams. We'll talk about how we distinguish the broken and the solid lines. But over here, you've got Koryo, Kumgang. This is a scholar. This is a mountain. Taebek. This is Gong again, or worker. This is Pyongwan, which means kind of 1. This is Shipjin, which means decimal or 10 from that position. You've got Jite, which is here, which means a person below the sky or the earth. And then you've got Chungkwan, the person above. So you can see water, and then Ilyo, this last one. Sorry, the swastika, the bad Nazis took it and flipped it the other way. They kind of ruined that. But the symbol is seen all over Asia. If you look on a map, like when you're traveling over there, if you see this symbol, it means there's a Buddhist temple there. And these are some Palge ones over here too, and you can see that some of them are the same, different characters. This one's shield. This one actually means shield. That's Palge number 5. So they're all making these characters on the ground. When we look at the taeguk, and both taeguk and Palge, they're usually for color belts, right? When they kind of go up there. And the Palge forms, as I showed you, they follow the rules for making a Chinese character. They all make Chinese characters, but the taeguk make the trigram symbols, and we talked about that before. So here's Palge. It starts the same thing, like 1, 2, 3, all the way around, and then 4, 5, 6. And the first 4 make worker. They make the same character. And then 5, 6, 7, and 8 start to make different characters, but this is why they got rid of them, because they weren't consistent. Because this doesn't really mean this trigram that it stands for right there, the kyung, that one kind of means heaven. And the last one, 8, means earth. And yeah, they made 8 mean earth, and they made 7 mean below the sky, because that should be the sky. But then they didn't do these efficiently, and they kind of went, wait, we need it to be a little bit more efficient. So they came up with Taeguk, and they do follow exactly on the trigram pattern when you go around and look at it. So it's kind of cool. And here you would see the Yeonmu-sun would look like this. Now there is a Chinese character called that means king or Wang, and it is this 3-character thing, but that's not what you're making. These connecting lines are part of that vector map that you have to make. You're making these. So Taeguk 1 makes 3 solid lines. Taeguk 2 makes 2 solid at the bottom, and the top one is a broken one, and so on. And you go 3, 4, then across 5, 6, 7, and 8. So this is the pattern for all the Taeguks, follows this, but how you step will make broken and solid lines. The way that you can tell on that is, like, here's Taeguk 3, and in the middle of Taeguk 3, if you can remember what you do there, you go into back stance and you do a single knife hand, and then you change your stance. You don't really go forward, but you move that foot forward a little bit, but your back foot stays, and you punch when you go into apkubi, or the front bending stance, and you do a punch. So you don't really move forward. If you don't move forward, it's a broken line. If you move forward, it's a solid line. These are things I'm going to show you when we get together so that you can see. And that's how you can tell if somebody's doing the form right too. Sometimes I've seen people teaching it incorrectly, and I can point this out to them so they can see that it's not following that pattern.
And then on the trigrams,
yeah,
the derivation of those, when did those come around? And
that's about 5,000 years ago is the very first time that they began to see people looking at that. And that's another talk actually I can give at some other point, because there's a lot of fascinating numbers. This is also where Claude Shannon, who is credited with binary mathematics, got his ideas for creating binary mathematics, believe it or not. So he was a student of what's called the I Ching, and he kind of looked at that. But maybe I'll bring that up in the class and we can look at it. But that's a whole nother topic of discussion. But it's really fascinating. But that shows up about 5,000 years ago.
Those are not a language. They only have those 8 representations of, like,
correct.
The earth.
Yeah, right. They have this right here. It's not a language. It's a symbol denoting the early universe. So when you look at Taeguk, you go from, if you look at these things, they're in opposite orientations. Okay, like this is heaven, this is Taeguk 1, and this is Taeguk 8, earth. They're opposing. You start in heaven and you end up in the earth. And then this one, if you look at it, it's a broken at the top, 2 solid, but this one's solid, 2 broken. So it's the opposite. And this goes, from, I think I had that on there for you. Heaven, lake, fire, thunder, wind, water, mountain, and earth, or all the things you go through. This is actually their early science. This is early Chinese science describing the world around them. As we can look at it as a potential, like you can say, like zodiacs or something like that. But even zodiac stuff started out with actual astronomical observations of the universe. It wasn't like they were making up stuff like they do now. I mean, these people knew the planet lines, they knew everything. Same thing here. They're just trying to describe the universe the best way they can. And this became a very predominant philosophy in Asian countries. So it wasn't obviously important to them the way they're looking at it, or they wouldn't have used this as one of their bases. And you've seen the Korean flag before, everyone. It's got 4 of these on there. It's got heaven and earth, and it's got the fire and water ones right here. It's only got 4, but the Korean flag, the name of the Korean flag is actually Taeguki. So Taeguki is the Korean flag. It's directly to this. So this was an important part of their country, especially when they created that flag, after the war, and they're kind of got so they really stuck to it. And I understand why they changed Palge to Taeguk. Excellent,
thank you.
Yeah, and then when you look at the black belt forms, these are when it really gets really cool. They did such a great job on it. Koryo here. Koryo is talking about the dynasty of Koryo, that when it's come together. But the Yeonmusun that it makes is actually this character, which means scholar. So you might hear that sometimes. You'll hear them talk about the two different things. Well, we've got a name, but we've also got a character that it makes on the ground that you're supposed to remember. And if you forget that character on the ground, if you don't know it, same with Kumgang. Kumgang literally, it means diamond mountain. Sometimes they equate it. They'll say hardness or whatever, but it's actually a mountain range, actually in North Korea. And it makes the character for mountain on the ground. Taebek, that's talking about a mountain range in Korea as well, just like kind of Kumgang, but it makes the character for worker or artisan. It's the man is the connection between heaven and earth. Pyeongwon, is talking about a vast plain or the number one. It really, can be both. That can be the horizon, sometimes in symbology. Shipjin is talking about 10. And really, what's really cool is if you put these two characters together, 1 and 10, you can see 1 right here on the bottom, and you can see 10 right here. That's what a scholar is. A scholar is a person that knows from 1 to 10. I always thought that one was kind of beautiful too. Jite doesn't have that little lip on it on the actual character. It doesn't really stick out there, obviously, but its meaning, this was an early way this character was written too. It means, standing on the earth, and Chungkwan means standing below the sky. Hansu is water, and Ilyo, this character means oneness. So that's where you're kind of seeing all that with all the black belt forms. And then finally, I know they tried to get some new Poomsae out. They were working really hard on it, and they came up with all this stuff. And we didn't really like the new Poomsae because it was more of a competition thing, and it was kind of like jump kicks, flying kicks, really cool, kind of neat. But we kind of wondered what they were doing. But then I started looking at their work. And this is one of the first things that they sent me when they were first developing these forms, which I don't want to say they've died off, but they've pretty much died off. But look what they did. When you look at this part right here, that little section, it says Poomsae Sun. Remember, sun means line. So Poomsae Sun. But look at the things they were making. So again, they're following the Poomsae theory, which the Poomsae is supposed to make something on the ground. And here you see they've got some really wild shapes now. They're not characters, but they're shapes about doing other things. And that's kind of neat. And this nare, this is a bird. So look, they're making like a bird shape. And this one really is a star. Sable, they're talking about a star. So it's really kind of neat what they were kind of looking at doing. And they were kind of following that pattern. But one of the big things that Westerners do miss is that we are supposed to be making something on the floor. And if you do this on a beach, it's really neat. We've done it on a beach before and then gone up in our hotel rooms, up high and look down, and you can kind of make out the characters. It's kind of cool when you do it. So basically, summary, I know this is a kind of a longer talk, but culture and language enrich everything and add to our martial arts. And that's really what we want as instructors and stuff to help us have longevity. Is there so much beauty in here? And if you dig into the language and you dig into the culture, you get the true context and you can transmit that knowledge down, and it doesn't have to get watered out. We don't have to look at W patterns and H patterns and things like that, but we can really tell the stories behind it. And I think that's super important for everything else. And the forms are really models or templates of the art themselves. It is our living encyclopedia, and it contains these messages that whoever came up with it wanted to pass along. They wanted the message to come along, and we don't want to get rid of that. So goes right into that. They have all sorts of information in them, both physical, historical, philosophical, the pictures, symbology, everything is there. It's right there in front of you. It's just not really so much about combat, as something else when we look at it. And that's kind of the end of everything. Again, this is just pictures of me at multiple world championships with friends I've made all over the world and stuff like that.